Hi, Kingsway family. Good morning. I'm so glad you're tuning in and part of our service today. We are gathering in the church auditorium around tables because it is our Kingsway Connect Sunday for the month of November. We're having some snacks and we're going to be discussing an issue with one another, and it's going to be a terrific Sunday. I'm glad you're going to be a little bit a part of it from where you are, at home or watching online. I'm really glad you're tuning in. Do you remember a year ago we had that terrible tragedy in British Columbia, the atmospheric river, the weather system that came through and flooded all around the Vancouver area, the lower mainland, and some people lost their lives in a landslide, and bridges were washed out, and farms were lost, and it was terrible. And it was interesting that exactly a year ago, this Sunday today, our church hosted a discussion with Pastor Barry and Carie-Ann Lau about climate change and our faith and what we can do as believers to help the situation, because we want to do the best for others. We want to be there for others. And so today, Carie-Ann will be moderating our discussion time this morning. And so she's going to be sharing about faith and climate change and just more insight into that, and ask us a bunch of questions to talk about at our tables and for you to talk about where you're at this morning. Carie-Ann is part of the Kingsway Church, and she is a geoscientist. She's an expert in her field, and she gets to travel all over our province actually and do assessments when weather events happen. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from her this morning. She'll have some questions for you in just a moment. So stay tuned. And I'm so glad that you're tuning in this morning, that you're part of the Kingsway Church family. And we miss you when you're not here, but we're glad that you're right there. So from me to you, have a fantastic day. And here's Carie-Ann with some questions for you.
Good morning, Kingsway Church. Today's our Connect Sunday, and we're going to be talking today about climate change. And it's a conversation that we started about a year ago when Pastor Barry and I had a conversation about what it means to be Christian and care about climate change. And that conversation happened as I was in the thick of responding to an atmospheric river that flooded large areas of BC, that damaged infrastructure, that caused several fatalities, and ultimately is now Canada's costliest natural disaster. And we wanted to take this time, in this kind of time of reflection, that kind of anniversary, and continue this conversation about climate change. And so today, as part of our Connect Sunday, we're going to be talking about us and climate change and how we interact with it. But my hope is that this conversation isn't full of shame for you, that these conversations lead to action and care, and that the people that you're with and talking to can have open and honest conversations. So if you find yourself getting caught up and feeling a bit frustrated, just remember to take time to breathe and relax and really check in with yourself about what you might be feeling and what might be going on with you. So I wanted to introduce myself again for those that don't know me. My name is Carie-Ann Lau. I've been a member of Kingsway Church since 2010. And in my day-to-day life, I'm a geologist that specializes in natural disasters. I deal with flooding and landslides. I deal with infrastructure and how it might be damaged. I deal with First Nation communities and how they are disproportionately affected by climate change-driven disasters. And I deal with communities and how they might be affected by, say, a landslide or a flood that might occur. And I'm really passionate about this work that I do. I've seen it over the span of my short career, 10 years doing this, really be driven by questions about climate change. I'm also a person that really cares about social justice. I care about, and I really think a lot about the way in which there is such inequity in this conversation about climate change. and how us as Christians really need to move towards action to see this as something that Jesus would have cared about and would be standing there saying, look up, let's do something. So what we're going to talk about today in our Connect Sunday, we have kind of three themes. One is climate change in you, one is climate change in Christianity, and then the third being, what do we do next? And there's going to be a series of these questions, and I'm in the conversation today in church, we're going to be facilitating that a little bit. But the first thing that I wanted to ask you in consideration of what you're doing at home here is to think about climate change in you. And this is a really important way to centralize yourself in that conversation and to see how what you see is valued and important. And so there's two questions that frame that. The first being, how have you seen weather changing during your lifetime? And it's okay to say things like the weather's getting weird. It's okay to tell stories because that's an important part of communicating climate change. You don't have to have graphs and figures to really talk about this. You can talk about what you've seen and how it's changed even during your life. And the second question being, what concerns you about climate change? What feelings come up when I say those words? What goes through your mind? What makes you ponder? What drives you towards questions about these? So the second kind of theme that I want to talk about is climate change in Christianity. And I think that's an important thing to have a conversation about as a church. So I wanted to introduce some of the ways in which I view this, and also some people that I've been influenced by, Christians and climate scientists. And I remember probably about 15 years ago, I was kind of a newish Christian. I'd been through some emotional and spiritual abuse in my life. And so I was dealing with this question of identity and who I was. And really getting these kind of influences in my brain of you know, who I valued and who I saw myself as. And there was a point on a retreat, and those that know me, like, staring at a mountain is something that I really love and value. I love looking at mountains. They're so beautiful. And this thought popped into my brain of God saying to me that you are as beautiful to me as the mountains you love. And it was a point that allowed me to see that I am valued by God, and the things that He values are so important, nature and the beauty around us. But it wasn't a position of being over nature, and it wasn't a position of being over that beauty and that mountains. It was a position of being with. And that's something that I see today as a Christian is a really important part of contextualizing who we are in this. We are part of God's creation, not over, but with God's creation. And in church, we're going to watch a short video from one of the people that I've really valued in this conversation as a scientist. Her name is Carie-Ann Lau. She is a Canadian scientist who specializes in climate change. She lives in Texas now, and she's also an advocate for conversations about climate change and how to communicate it. And as a Christian, she values the kinds of conversations that also spark, how do you see Christianity as part of your climate action? And so we're going to watch the video where she explains what the Bible says about our positionality as Christians. And if you have some time, I'd really encourage you to take a look at it. She also has a series of other videos that are on YouTube under the title Global Weirdlings that kind of address some of the major questions about climate change. But I found this video really helpful in terms of contextualizing how God sees our position within nature. So as we kind of reflect on that climate change in Christianity, I wanted to take two questions. So the first, our third question being, how does your faith mix with your day-to-day choices about your environmental impact? So what are the things that you look at, and how does your faith move you to action maybe in some of those places? And then the fourth being, do you think that Christians help or hinder climate change action? And that, I hope, is not a slight or a condemnation. It's just a question that I think we need to address about what we see as our position in addressing climate change. And then the third theme that I wanted to talk about was moving to action. So what can we do to address climate change? And there'll be a list of resources that you can take a look at, lots of websites, lots of groups, lots of church organizations that really do center some of these climate change questions. And what I've done in my life is really become an advocate for active transportation, whether that be biking, whether that be walking, whether that be using public transit. And our family has really enjoyed getting around by bike. We've biked just in the last about year and a half. I myself have biked about 6,500 kilometers. And as of late, we've thrown Christmas lights on the bike to make it more fun as it gets dark at night. And it's just a really fun and active way to kind of make my contribution towards climate change. And so there's a list of resources. One of the big things is making sure that you understand what your biggest area of impact might be. So taking account of something you might call a carbon footprint. And there's websites that you can go and do that to figure out what are the areas that you might be able to make the most benefit or the most impact. And so the two questions that we're answering in church, what can we do to address climate change? The first being, what actions can you take to reduce your environmental impact? Might be something you have to think about a little bit more. And then the next question, and our last question being, what can we do as a church to address climate change? Do you have any ideas about ways in which we might make a better impact? And we're going to have a suggestion box to drop off. You can also email the church to let them know about what are the ways that you think that we could be making a bigger difference to reduce our environmental impact. So I hope you're able to take some time today to ask these questions. Maybe you have a few people with you, or maybe you're reflecting back on this conversation after you've come back from church. It's a really important conversation that I think we need to have as Christians and not see us as, this is science or politics, but that this is something that Jesus would have really deeply cared about. He would have seen the impacts on the poor. He would have seen how certain groups are being more affected by this. And he would have also, I think, had a lot of lament about the ways in which our society is really valuing stuff and not necessarily looking at others and how our value of stuff might be affecting others. So I'll leave you with that. It's a hard conversation. It's an important conversation. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody ever has about climate change. Maybe you want to learn a little bit more. Just shoot me a message on Facebook and I'll be happy to take a look. So thanks, Kingsway. I hope you have a great day. It's been beautiful weather, and take care.